discredit the Mueller investigation, do the president's bidding.
This is a war on law. This is a war on justice. This is a war on the Justice Department. This is a war on the FBI.
Well, it's also a war on understatement, Joe. Now, who is carrying out a war against the reputation, integrity of the FBI, if anyone did? Well, I'd say it's former Obama AG Loretta Lynch, former Obama FBI Director Jim Comey, and former Obama Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who waged war on the FBI by damaging its reputation. Now, how did they do that? Well, they put the FBI's future in jeopardy by eroding confidence in one of our treasured law enforcement institutions, because you cannot start spying on an American citizen as some kind of insurance policy against a presidential candidate you don't happen to like. In fact, you cannot surveil an American citizen based on falsified evidence at all, or by omitting a material fact in a FISA application for a warrant. But I'll tell you, the left just refuses to address the central point of the Nunes House Intel memo. I was thinking about this earlier today when I was hosting my radio show. Remember when Democrats used to care about protecting American civil liberties? Post 9/11, the ACLU warned about various ways the Bush administration was endangering the Bill of Rights. They warned about the Patriot Act and the growing surveillance society. By the way, I agree. And they sounded alarms over the weakening of the Freedom of Information Act by reclassifying documents as unclassified but sensitive. And the liberals even complained, and some other civil libertarians, about the fairness of these long no-fly lists. But this is my favorite part of this ACLU list of grievances, was number 8. Political spying. It was called political spying. Government agencies, including the FBI and the Department of Defense, have conducted their own spying on innocent and law-abiding Americans. Through the Freedom of Information Act, the ACLU learned the FBI had been consistently monitoring peaceful groups such as Quakers, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Greenpeace, and the Arab American Anti-Defamation Committee, and indeed the ACLU itself. Well, PETA got surveilled, apparently, but I guess Carter Page and the Trump campaign just don't qualify for Fourth Amendment protections. The ACLU has been kind of silent. Now, there was a time when Democrats cared about things like FISA court abuses.
The FISA court process is one of the most one-sided approaches in American government. I know of no other court that doesn't have some kind of adversarial discussion where there are two points of view.
There should be some adversarial process, challenging it, questioning it, just as we do in the normal court.
The opinions themselves will benefit by having an adversarial process in key cases where the court has the benefit of hearing the other side, of seeing opposing case law.
Oh my gosh, my producer just said in my ear, look, he was on RTTV. Did you see that? That's great. Well, so they were all worried. Look at what could happen with the FISA court. But now, however, FISA is beyond reproach as long as it's used toward the ever-noble goal of destroying Donald Trump, or preventing him back then of being president at all. Today on my radio show, Newt Gingrich agreed that a criminal investigation should be undertaken to discover how the FBI purposely misled the FISA court and may have obstructed justice in the Hillary email investigation.
I want to emphasize this. 98% of all FBI agents are honest, patriotic Americans trying to enforce the law, but they are tainted by the people at the very top who clearly were corrupt and were clearly violating the law. This will lead to a criminal investigation, and frankly, I don't understand why the Attorney General has not taken steps.
That's a great question. The question is, with Rod Rosenstein and as Deputy AG, could there ever really be a special counsel appointed to explore any of this? Or will it be up to Congress to find all the relevant documents and force his hand? Whatever happens, there is no doubt about the following. After all their years of claiming to be advocates for fairness and civil liberties, the Dems have been outed as frauds of the worst order. And that's the angle. In moments we'll be joined by the man at the center of the revelations inside the Nunes memo. But first, who is Carter Page? And why did he become a target of the FISA court? Fox's Ed Henry joins us now from New York with more. Ed.
Laura, great to see you. Carter Page is almost the Forrest Gump in this whole tale. Keeps popping up everywhere, but after these many investigations, nobody can quite figure out what he did for the Trump campaign, let alone whether he did anything wrong. The key Forrest Gump moment came on March 21st, 2016, when then-candidate Donald Trump appeared at a Washington Post edit board meeting, and the first question was about how he was going to finally reveal his foreign policy team. The context being it was hard for an anti-establishment candidate to get Republican foreign policy stalwarts on his team, so he wanted outside-the-box choices. The future president revealed only 5 names. One was he called George Papadopoulos an excellent guy, and referred to another advisor simply as, quote, Carter Page, Ph.D., setting off a scramble over who this man of mystery was. Bloomberg News quickly noted the only real connection was they're both contrarians on Russia, wanting to work with Vladimir Putin in part because they believe policymakers in both parties are still clinging to a Cold War mindset. Ronald Reagan, in fact, sparked Page's interest in Russia at an early age after he saw Reagan on TV conducting arms control talks and noticed one of his advisors wearing a Navy uniform. The Gipper inspired him to enroll in the U.S. Naval Academy. He worked on arms control policy at the Pentagon, earned 3 graduate degrees, including that Ph.D. from the University of London. By 2000, he jumped into investment banking at Merrill Lynch. Because of a friendship with the Ukrainian billionaire, the firm had him open the Moscow office in 2004. For 3 years, he worked on deals with Russian state-owned energy companies. Fast forward to June 2013. Donald Trump was still on The Apprentice, and U.S. counterintelligence officials questioned Page about his contacts with a possible Russian spy, so he was on their radar before the campaign. During the campaign in July 2016, then-campaign manager Corey Lewandowski reportedly approved Page's personal trip to Moscow, where he gave a speech criticizing U.S. policy toward Russia and met with Russian government officials. None of that necessarily nefarious. By September 2016, Page was out. And in fact, tonight, Donald Trump Jr. told Tucker that Page was not a real player and suggested he was more of a, quote, patsy. Though Page told the Senate Intel Committee last year he was a regular presence at Trump Tower. Even more curious, as we learned from Devin Nunes' memo, the FBI used the dossier to get a FISA warrant to listen in on Page's calls starting in October 2016, a month after we're told he left the campaign. And the surveillance was renewed several times deep into 2017 after he was gone. We noted this began at the March 2016 editorial board meeting with the Post, where George Papadopoulos has since pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russians. Carter Page has not been charged with anything. Laura?
Ed, thank you so much for that report. And joining us now from New York, we're pleased to welcome, in an exclusive, former Trump campaign advisor, Carter Page. Carter, it's good to see you tonight. I know you have not spoken out about this House Intel memo yet or the reaction to it. What is your reaction?
Well, my first reaction, Laura, when I saw it was, you know, there was a lot of details that kept dripping out, and it sounded really bad. And when I actually saw it, it was even worse than I could have possibly imagined. But then what was particularly interesting is sort of the next 48 hours after that, where part of the attack on Chairman Nunes and the committee was to come up with any new information to discredit me and anything related to the investigation or the overall investigation and all the great work that HIPSI's been doing. So it's pretty stark contrast between, you know, getting the facts out there and having, still getting attacked. So it's pretty crazy.
This is what Donnie Trump said earlier tonight. Ed referred to the interview he did just a short while ago with Tucker Carlson. He was asked about you, and this is what he said.
This is a low-level person who worked in a campaign. This is someone who I've seen the emails where they said, well, this person's no longer working on the campaign. I believe one of my family members responded, who the heck is that individual? We'd never even heard of him. So to use that, again, as the basis to then try to attack the duly elected president, to do it then after that person's no longer even part of a campaign. All of these people kind of hang around. They're going to get their book deal. They want to be a part of something. So to utilize that person, I mean, they seem like a great patsy for that.
Your reaction to what Donnie says, you know, low-level figure in the campaign. I don't think you ever have really disputed that, but your reaction.
Well, it was really impossible to help out in any way because, as you were alluding to, the attacks started almost immediately. Just anyone who had any connection or had ever done any work, positive or otherwise, in Russia was constantly sort of the #1 target for attack. So it was became a people that were on the committee, and as he mentioned, there was a few names that were mentioned, but really the people that came on or in the early months were pretty incredible. And
but Carter, there was only one meeting, though, right? I mean, this was kind of slapped together in 24 hours. I talked to one of the people involved in it earlier tonight, and this was kind of thrown together really fast because, like, we got to have a list of people who are advising us, and this is when not a lot of people were helping out Trump in the spring of 2016. And so they came up with this list, and you guys had one meeting at the Trump International, I understood. But after that, there was no formal gatherings of this group. Is that correct?
That you actually raised an important point, Laura. I should have clarified. Correct one point that Ed had alluded to. That one meeting, I actually had previous.
You were in Hawaii.
I was in. Well, I haven't said where I was, but if that's
okay, sorry,
now,
you were
it's
in
now
Hawaii.
if it's been real. Okay.
Okay, but Carter, you know what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is you were put on this list, and your past work that you did in Russia, we'll get into that later, raised a red flag. And the FBI apparently had been watching you for some time. Okay, so we fast forward to July, and you go to Moscow. You say you were invited to give a speech at a college there. Mm-hmm. When you went there, did you meet with government officials or people connected closely with Putin?
So
Yes or no?
I gave a speech, and there was one senior government official who spoke after me. He was walking out of the building after he gave his speech, and we had a very brief conversation for less than 10 seconds. It was really a exchange of pleasantries. But a lot of the things he was talking about, you could tell there were positive opportunities on the horizon in terms of U.S.-Russia relations. So
was that Sechin? Was that Igor Sechin?
No, I've never met Sechin in my life. So.
So that's in the.
Yeah.
So just so people know, and I mean, I find this to be fascinating that in this fake dossier, there is an entire paragraph, and I believe it's on page 31. Where it says that in terms of substance of their discussion, Igor Sechin, who is a very former KGB guy, president of Rosneft, the state-owned oil company, said that the Rosneft president was so keen to lift personal and corporate Western sanctions imposed on the company that he offered Page, Trump's associate, the brokerage of up to 19% privatized stake in Rosneft in return. And Page had expressed interest and confirmed that were Trump elected president, then sanctions on Russia would be lifted. That's right from the dossier, Carter. And I think a lot of people hear about the dossier, but they don't know what's in it. So you're saying tonight that you have never met Igor, I always forget his name, Sechin. You've never met him.
I've never met him in my entire life. And what's interesting about it, if you do the math on that, the 19% had a market value of about $11 billion. So if you think I'm going to get paid off some way, that seems like a pretty hefty sum.
That's pretty good. I'm going to borrow some money from you someday. Carter, hold right there. We have a lot more to talk about, and it's fun. It's actually fun to read through this dossier because it's like woo, crazy stuff. And we're going to have more to talk about after this in a short break. Stay there. Welcome back. We now resume our exclusive interview with former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, the man at the center of that just-released House Intel memo. Carter, when I saw that they started to listen in on your phone calls in October, that was after the Trump campaign had kind of put a termination on the relationship with you. I thought to myself, like, who wants to work in any campaign? If an individual, an American citizen, can be surveilled by the use of a dossier that was funded by the opponent, the political opponent, and they're all worried about Russia and their tactics? I mean, Russia does stuff like that, frankly, to their political opponents. But we're not supposed to do that. So your reaction when you found out that your calls at that point were surveilled?
Well, the funny part about it is literally 1 week later, after they started hacking and wiretapping me, one of the emails I sent out was filing a complaint to the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a organization that the U.S. and many other countries is a part of. They had an election monitoring system going on in the United States, monitoring illegal influence and election rigging, and I lodged a complaint there. And so I think one of the first things they were picking up on was my long complaint that I sent to Vienna in the OSCE. So it'd be interesting to hear what the reaction was to that when they.
When did you know, by the way, Carter, that you were of interest to the FBI? It predated the relationship with the Trump campaign. It predated that, according to the FBI. So when did you know? They ever call you up or try to talk to you or say, "What are you doing over there in Russia? You're very well connected." Did they ever approach you?
I've talked to them, and I actually mentioned this. I sent a letter to Director Comey on Sunday, September 25th, 2016, 2 days after the defamatory articles came out against me. And I was, as I mentioned there, I basically told him everything is totally false. If you have any questions about this witch hunt, which is what I called it, please don't hesitate to contact me. I would love to set the record straight and talk with your agents. And as I mentioned in that memo to Mr. Comey, I said, well, I've been in contact with members of the intelligence community for many, many years, and I'd be happy to help out, again, in terms of providing you some accurate insights.
I mean, the way you are portrayed, and people who don't know you, I mean, I guess people just reading this quickly, headline readers, like, oh, Carter Page was a spy for Russia. I mean, well, that's what I think that's what just regular folks who aren't focusing on a lot of these details, that's what they believe. That's what they think.
I mean, that case, I was a witness to, there was a diplomat here in New York who I happened to meet at a conference, and, we struck up a conversation. I met him one time after that. And I actually was teaching a course at New York University that semester, and I just told him a couple things I was telling my students about, and he wasn't really interested, and I sent him a couple of course documents. That was it.
I have a couple of questions for you, though. There's some things that I don't really make sense to me. Like, what about that letter that Time Magazine said you wrote to the academic press, and where they quote you as saying, over the past half year, I have had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin in preparation for their presidency of the G20 summit next month, where energy issues will be a prominent point on the agenda, the letter reads. Did you write that?
Well, it's totally taken out of context. I basically,
what do you mean taken out of context? I would never say I had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin. Like,
the G20, President Trump was at the G20 last summer. It is a collection of countries from around the world.
We all know that. But why would you write that?
I was offering, I was invited to provide some, they put together a roundtable of energy experts, literally people from around the world, top companies around the world, and I offered some insights.
It sounds like you were to me, it sounds like you were really, you're really close to the staff of the Kremlin there. I mean, the way it's worded, I mean, I wouldn't have worded it that way. And I think what happens is people see that, and then they say, well, he went to Moscow in July of 2016 to kind of speak at a university. But why would you do that when you were with the Trump campaign? And who signed off on it? And was it really a cover for a meeting with government officials? I know, that's what people think.
Well, but this is where context is important. Basically, it was some ignorant academic who, I submitted my, it was a copy of my thesis, and they were considering it at an academic press for publication. And, they're coming back at me, coming after me with all these false sort of false concepts about what's actually going on in, Russia and across Eurasia and across Middle East. Asia, Europe, and essentially having served and been part of that informal group, we had a couple of meetings. Big deal.
No, I got it. I think going to Moscow in July 2016, that you're just setting yourself up for scrutiny. I mean, did someone in the Trump campaign, did they okay you going? Did you ask them? I've seen varying accounts of that from you. Did someone say go for it, or
there was no go for it? Again, I was an informal, unpaid advisor, and
but did you
I
tell
mentioned
anybody
it to
at the Trump campaign you were going?
Yeah, I mean, I've been grilled literally many hours on this in both chambers of Congress many times, and I gave them a heads up, and they said, it's fine to go, but you're have nothing to do with the Trump campaign as part of this.
And you're actually suing. Are you suing the federal government? I mean, I think you saw New York Times tonight is pushing for a release of all the underlying documents in your case. Are you in favor of that?
Absolutely. And actually, one of the articles that's mentioned in the House Intelligence memo from Friday, it references one article, and actually that was rebroadcast by a state propaganda agency in Washington. Broadcasting Board of Governors funds Radio Free Europe. And for the last 70 years, most of its history, it was supposed to be used for, offering ideas to countries around the world. They changed the law in 2013, and now they can push government propaganda in the U.S. So this was the first election where that ever happened. So, when Sean on his show was mentioning a list of questions as they kind of go to the next stage of this investigation, I think, and actually that's run by State Department. It's
Broadcasting Board of Governors, but they put that Yahoo News story out. But you're suing the Broadcast Board of Governors and who else? Very quickly.
Oath Inc., which is the parent company for Yahoo, and Huffington Post,
News,
which has a ton of articles.
Okay, Carter, we really appreciate your spending some time with us tonight. I know everybody was after an interview with you, but I just think an innocent American, I mean, from my understanding, is wrapped up in this whole thing, and I find the whole thing terrifying, and we wish you the best. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, this has been unbelievable. Stay right here. We have a lot more when we return. Commentary from our experts on that interview and what it reveals. Stay with us. Three of them: Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis, Fox News contributor, Washington Examiner reporter Byron York, and Fox News contributor, senior editor at The Federalist, Molly Hemingway. Byron, let's start with you. Reaction.
Well, sometimes it's hard to actually get all the facts out of Carter Page because he just doesn't speak all that directly. But that point where he said, I've talked about this extensively with both houses of Congress, which is true. I mean, if you read the interview that he had with the House Intelligence Committee, it just went on and on and on and on. I thought the most telling part of your questioning was about him saying that touting himself as an advisor to the Kremlin. Why would you do that? I think most people theorize, and we're just theorizing, that he was just trying to make himself look more of an insider than he was.
That never happens in Washington or New York, where people inflate their resumes.
Correct.
Or Molly.
Well, also, he was a businessman based in Russia for a long time. That's where he's done his life's work. He does have contacts with Russia. That is actually not a crime to have these things. And so just seeing him and seeing him talk about some of these things is very interesting. This is a man who has had all the power of the federal government going up against him. They're surveilling him, and also this has very much affected his life and his reputation, his business relationships. I think it's time for the federal government, if they think he's guilty of something, they need to put up or shut up and let this man attempt to reclaim his life.
They have not told him he's a target of the investigation, Ron. Your reaction to what he said tonight?
Well, I mean, he is kind of a weird dude, but like the fact that he says, release all the FISA stuff. Release it.
He doesn't seem worried about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, it just seems like he wants all this stuff to come out because he doesn't think there's any there. But remember, because he was a U.S. citizen, when they went to surveil him, it's not just that there's suspicion he could be acting as an agent of foreign power. You also have to show he's violating a criminal statute. And the Nunes memo doesn't say what statute did they cite as a potential violation. Was it just some pretextual thing, or was there honestly something where they thought he was violating law? We need to release all of this information.
I felt, I mean, just as a human reaction, I feel sorry for Carter Page. I mean, I know he was in Russia doing, I mean, I lived in Russia as a student. Like, I know a lot of people doing business in Russia. They're commercial real estate, people in science and so forth. Just because you've done business in Russia, and you know people, doesn't mean you're a Russian spy, but most people, like, they hear Carter Page, oh, he was a Russian spy. People just think that because of the way the fake media has reported this.
I've heard him referred to on network television as a known Russian agent.
A known Russian agent. Now, this is the stuff that drives me crazy.
That. But you raised a really interesting idea about what is his status with the Mueller investigation, because he is one of, if there is collusion, he's a really important part of this. Papadopoulos was the other person who was very important of this. He was not charged with any crime relating to a criminal conspiracy. He simply was charged with lying to the FBI. Now, what's the deal with Carter Page? He hasn't been charged with anything. Are they contemplating charging him with anything? And if they don't, where is the collusion?
Molly, this is what the federal government can do. And this is, again, in the angle I did before he came on. Liberals used to care about civil liberties. I mean, those comments from Blumenthal, the FISA court, the abuses of the FISA court, you don't know what they're doing. They can spy on Americans. And here we have that happen starting in October after he left the Trump campaign.
Well, and this is foundational to our understanding of what it means to be American, that the federal government cannot deprive you of life, liberty, property. They can't arrest you or spy on you without a really good reason. And if the civil rights and civil liberties of Carter Page can be violated, they can be violated for anyone. And that's why it's very important that we can trust these courts, particularly because the target of the investigation doesn't get the chance to plead his own case. So we rely on the government to make sure that they provide all the information that is key.
We should point out that the warrant, it's often pointed out that, well, they didn't put the warrant on him until after he left the campaign. But that not only gets his phone calls going forward, it gets all of his email going backward, back when he was in the campaign. Plus, it allows the FBI to break into his home, search it, and plant electronics when he is not there.
And potentially other locations. I mean, if they identify other locations, they could have surveilled other places.
I mean, I'm saying it's ironic we're talking about Russia when we do this in the United States of America. I mean, Russia, Russia, Russia. What are we doing to our own people? I want you to react, Congressman, to both Trey Gowdy and it was Trey Gowdy and who else? Nunez, of course, made the comment today about the footnote and reacting to it. Let's watch.
A footnote saying that something might be political is a far cry from letting the American people know that the Democrats in the Hillary campaign paid for dirt that the FBI then used to get a warrant on an American citizen to spy on another campaign.
I read the footnote. I know exactly what the footnote says. It took longer to explain it the way they did than if they'd just come right out and said Hillary Clinton for America and DNC paid for it. But they didn't do that.
Ron, is there anything that can be done to the people responsible for filing that, omitting a material fact, because it was omitted in that application?
Yeah, look, I mean, your bar license, if you're practicing law, I mean, that goes into that. Look, there could be criminal liability. It would depend on the intent, and that's why we need all this information. But that footnote, I read it. I read the Schiff memo. It is the most circuitous way to say that there may potentially, I mean, they could have come out and said it. The way they did it was not enough candor for the court.
It's a material fact. You omitted a material fact from the application. If I were that FISA judge, I would be livid because it makes the judge make the wrong or potentially the wrong decision.
It's the key question. Should the FBI be lured into surveilling a political opponent using opposition research bought and paid for by the opposing campaign? That's the key question.
China would do it. Russia would do it. North Korea would do it. Cuba would do it. And apparently we can do that in the United States very quickly.
That paragraph in the Nunes memo was very, very clear. It says they didn't tell them that the DNC and the Clinton campaign was paying for it, and they did not.
100% true. Even the Schiff memo will not dispute that.
And we're going to be looking for the State Department shoe to drop perhaps on this. I know you've been writing about it, Molly. You've been talking about it. Thank you all. Great stuff, guys. And by the way, while Democrats are fixating on Russia, another overseas threat is growing. Victor Davis Hanson explains in studio next. Welcome back to the Ingraham Angle. While Democrats shriek about Russia, Communist China is quietly expanding its power and influence across the globe. Joining us here in the studio to discuss is Stanford professor, columnist, great guy, brilliant Victor Davis Hanson. VDH, good to see you, man, in the studio. Love it.
Thank you.
I always have you on the radio, but I hardly ever get to see you. Before we get into that, I want to just get your reaction very quickly to the Carter Page interview, what he said.
I think he was a tragic figure. I feel bad because he wouldn't have been where he is had there not been this crazy mythographic dossier and had he not just sort of volunteered for Trump. And he was used, Carter Page, he was at Russia, therefore we can surveil him and see what turns up from other people. So he was a tool. And he's probably, I think every trial lawyer in Washington, D.C. is watching your show tonight because he's got a lot of possible suits against Fusion, GPS, Steele, Glenn Simpson, DOJ, FBI.
Yeah, it never ends.
I hope he finds redemption.
And meanwhile, as it's Russia, 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 you and I talk about this a lot on the radio airwaves, but China is slowly but surely amassing a huge band of influence across the globe in academic institutions. Let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, China's got 10 times the GDP as Russia. It's got 5 times the population. It's a real threat. And it's sort of doing what Japan did in the 1930s with a greater Asia prosperity sphere. So it goes to these neighbors, the Philippines, the Japanese, and it says the United States is in isolation, it's on the wane, cut a deal with us. And we used to check that with a huge Navy. That was what the American Navy did in World War II and during the Cold War. And the Navy ground against radical Islam, and we're worried about China, but we've given that card up because of this crazy hysteria over Russia.
So we could be working with Russia on various fronts. We don't agree with them on a bunch of things, but we could be working with them more or at all on fighting the jihad.
Yeah, they have a border with North Korea. They have a nuclear Pakistan, they have a nuclear India, they have a nuclear China, they have a nuclear North Korea. They don't need another nuclear Iran on their border, and they had problems with their Muslim population.
So talk about why the global elites have flocked to protect China and now flock to demonize Russia. China is good and deserving of our attention. Yes. They have some problems. Russia's the real threat. Russia's economy is smaller than France's.
Yes. But remember, Russia wasn't the real threat. After Bush clamped down in East Ossetia, the Clinton administration, Clinton and the Obama administration said, you've been too hard on Russia. We're going to reset. We got that little plastic red button from I think it came from a jacuzzi in Geneva, and she pushed it and said, Romney was the person who was hysterical. And then the hot mic exchange with Obama about missile defense and I'll be flexible after the election. Russia was good, and then suddenly Russia was bad because the narrative changed. And China has always been the obstacle because 1/4 of the world's trade, half its oil goes right through the South China Sea, and now they have a valve at the Spratly Islands. They can control it. And they could stop North Korea tomorrow.
Victor Davis Hanson, come on radio tomorrow if you can. We'd love to have you on,
thank you.
As always. And up next, we'll explain why CNN seems so smug and satisfied with bad news today. And this just in, CNN finally has something to be happy about. Millions of Americans losing their money. Wolf Blitzer reported today's nearly 1,200-point drop in the Dow with an odd satisfaction that seemed to say, it's bad for America, but it's okay because it's worse for Trump.
Breaking news, nosedive. The Dow plunges more than 1,100 points at the closing bell. The visual was pretty awful for the president.
If I'm not mistaken, the 1,500 point, as low as it dropped, was in the middle of his speech. Any president would be aware of that. This president uniquely so due to how much cable television he consumes.
Well, whatever cable TV he's consuming from the ratings, I can tell you, it ain't CNN. Had these guys actually been paying attention to the president's event in Cincy today, they would have seen clear signs of an economic renaissance in the heartland. Now, about half of Americans aren't in the stock market, but they've seen record bonuses and pay raises generated, many of them, most of them, by Trump tax cuts. So what Nancy Pelosi calls crumbs, ordinary Americans call a godsend, as they told the president today.
What it means to my family is the same that it means to all hardworking American families right now who are reaping the benefits of your tax cuts. It means that we'll have more money in the bank, more money to make ends meet. personally, for my family, my husband Tim and I are in the process of buying a home. And in the fall, both of my kids, Katie and Matthew, will be going to college. So we'll be using that money. It'll just help us make ends meet.
Now, I'll take that lady's common sense over Nancy Pelosi's crumbs any day. Main Street is getting helped by Trump policies. CNN and the rest of them better start noticing. More in a moment. Before we go, we want to hear what you thought about my exclusive interview tonight with Carter Page. So be sure to tweet me about it at Ingraham Angle. And that is all the time we have left this evening. Miss Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team, take it from here. Shannon.
Listen.